Okay, hey y'all, welcome back. My computer's being really weird, so hopefully this is working. Yes, welcome back. Today we are going to keep on keeping on learning about the immune system. So this week is the last week of the immune system. So you have two more lessons on the immune system. Today we're going to talk mainly about bacteria, and then your second lesson for this week is mainly about viruses. So go ahead and get out your notes to take notes with, label it. Today is immune system day 3. And then I want you to review from last week, what is the body's second and third line of defense against disease? So go and review your notes from last week, figure out the answer to that question, then meet me back here. Work. Okay. Okay, so hopefully you remembered that our second line of defense against disease is going to be that innate immune system, so that non-specific response, mainly phagocytes ingesting pathogens and destroying them. And then our third line of defense is the adaptive immune system, which is where lymphocytes and B cells and T cells work together to create a specific immune response to whatever pathogen has invaded. Okay, so today our guiding questions are going to be: 1, how do bacteria cause infections? And 2, how do antibiotics work? And then you can come up with this. Why is it important to protect against disease? Also, why is it important for antibiotics to work? Think about when you've taken antibiotics and why you might need those. And then if you don't understand this yet, you'll understand it by the end of today. When you don't take all of your antibiotic, bacteria be like, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That was embarrassing. Wow. Anyway, you'll get that by the end of today. Okay. So let's just jump right in. We've learned about bacteria. Hopefully you remember that bacteria are prokaryotic and they're living organisms. So let's just do some quick review on what bacteria are. They are living organisms. They are prokaryotic, meaning they do not have a nucleus or membrane-bound organelles. And bacteria can come in 3 different forms. You can see bacteria that's rod-shaped, that's spiral. Wow, these are opposite. This should be the spiral shape, clearly, and this should be the spherical shape. I should proofread. So those are the 3 forms you might see bacteria in. Okay, so some bacteria can cause disease. Bacteria can cause disease in a couple of different ways. The first, they could invade tissues and start to infect the tissues, or they can make toxins and release toxins. A toxin is just like a poison released by the organism. So this is a example of a bacteria releasing a toxin. So those are 2 different ways that the bacteria could cause disease. Sorry, y'all. Why is this pop up? Okay. Some diseases caused by bacteria. You don't necessarily need to write these down, but I just think it's good for y'all to know so that you can understand the difference between some bacterial diseases and viral diseases. So acne is caused by bacteria. Anthrax, which is a bacteria that can be sent through the mail. A lot of people, not a lot of people, but anthrax has been used for like assassination attempts. Lyme disease is caused by bacteria. Tetanus is caused by bacteria. Tooth decay. Strep is a bacterial infection. So if you've ever had strep throat, that's bacteria. Notice different than viral infections. So coronavirus, COVID-19, what's happening right now is a virus, not a bacteria. We're going to learn about that in the next lesson. So how do we treat bacterial diseases? If you said antibiotics, good on you. We use antibiotics to treat bacterial diseases. And we're going to learn about some ways in which antibiotics function on the next slides. This is like one of the most important things to understand. Antibiotics do not work on viruses. And if you know this, then you will become a much more informed patient in the future, and you'll be able to understand medicine and the medicines that doctors prescribe you a lot better. Antibiotics do not work on viruses. But when it comes down to it, prevention is going to be the best method to fight bacterial diseases, similar for viruses, meaning washing your hands, just keeping things clean, disinfecting surfaces that are often touched. Those are going to be the best ways to fight bacterial diseases. But let's jump into how antibiotics work. This gets a little bit specific, but you guys have learned all of these ideas before, so you should be able to pick up on this. And if you need help, I have office hours. So Antibiotics are compounds that kill or inhibit the growth of microbes, specifically bacteria, and they do that by specifically targeting functions of life that are specific to that prokaryote. If you remember, our cells are eukaryotic. So the medicine is not going to target anything our cells are doing. It's going to target what a prokaryote cell is doing. So some features that might be targeted right here could be key enzymes, 70S ribosomes. If you remember, in eukaryotes we have 80S ribosomes, not whereas prokaryotes have 70S. And also cell wall formation. For us, that works because we don't have cell walls, whereas bacteria do. And if it targets cell wall formation, then what that means is the antibiotic can literally prevent the bacteria from dividing and from growing because it can't form any new cell walls. So it can't go through binary fission. Because eukaryotic cells do not possess those features, antibiotics only target the pathogenic bacteria and not the infected host. So that's how antibiotics keep us safe and healthy, but can kill the bacteria. And basically, there are two different ways antibiotics work. They are either going to be antibiotics that kill the invading bacteria, which we call bactericidal, or suppress the bacteria's ability to reproduce. That would be called bacteriostatic. So if it targets the cell wall, it's going to make it difficult for the bacteria to do binary fission, which is how it reproduces. And so that's how those kind of antibiotics would basically stop the bacteria from being able to grow. So I love this picture because, let's see if I can move myself, because it really does show you some of the most common antibiotics that maybe you have been prescribed before. So cell wall synthesis, so penicillin, which is the first antibiotic to ever have been discovered, targets the formation of cell walls. So if a bacteria cannot form new cell walls, then that bacteria can't grow. So it'll eventually die off. That's what penicillins are going to target. Sulfonamides, maybe? See, I don't know how to say everything either. They target metabolic enzymes. Tetracyclines are a really common antibiotic. You might get prescribed tetracyclines if you take antibiotics for acne or anything like that. Those are going to target the ribosomes in the bacteria cell. Polymyxins target the cell membrane, and then quinolones target the DNA synthesis. So now, if you ever get prescribed an antibiotic, you can kind of know like exactly what function of that bacteria it's targeting to destroy, which is pretty cool. One important thing we have to talk about when we're talking about antibiotics is this idea of antibiotic resistance. So the first antibiotic, penicillin, was discovered in 1928 by Alexander Fleming. This is a picture of him in his lab. And basically since then, antibiotics have exploded. They are used to treat a variety of bacterial infections. They're also used in livestock. They're just used everywhere. And antibiotic can either be narrow spectrum, meaning think of narrow as like small, specific. Narrow spectrum antibiotics are going to be effective against a specific bacteria, or they can be broad spectrum antibiotics, meaning they're effective against many different bacterias. So some strains of bacteria have evolved with genes that give resistance to antibiotics, and some strains now have multiple resistance, and this has really happened since the discovery of antibiotics. And basically, bacterial genes can gain resistance by encoding traits that can either degrade or destroy the antibiotic, that can block the entry of the antibiotic, that can increase its removal from the bacteria system, or just change the target of that antibiotic. And basically, because bacteria reproduce so rapidly, they can reproduce double every hour for some bacterias. The resistant strains can grow really, really quickly following the initial mutation of resistance. And resistant strains can pass their genes that give them resistance to other bacterial strains through gene transfer. So this picture really kind of explains antibiotic resistance in a really visual way, which I love. So let's say that you have a strep infection in your throat. and you're given a 7 to 10 day what word am I looking for? Antibiotic regimen, and you're supposed to take it for 7 to 10 days, and then you start feeling better after like day 4, so you just stop taking the antibiotic. And this is actually one of the major problems with antibiotic resistance, so hopefully you learn from this to not stop your antibiotics early. But let's say you stop at day 4. So in your throat, you'll have a strep infection that's mainly this blue bacteria, right? So mainly bacteria that's going to be killed by the antibiotic. But you might have 2 or 3 bacterial cells, which are these orange ones, that just happen to be a little bit more resistant to antibiotic. They need a little bit more of potency. They need a little longer to die, whatever happens. But they have developed some kind of mutation that makes them just a little bit resistant. Let's say you stop at day 4. Those antibiotics have killed the bacteria that caused the illness. You feel better. It's probably also killed the good bacteria in your body that was protecting you. But those 2 resistant bacteria didn't die off because they were able to kind of fight against that antibiotic. The resistant bacteria now can grow and basically take over, and you can get a stronger strep infection, and that can spread to other people. And then the bacteria that's resistant can even transfer its genes to the bacteria that was not resistant, which can cause more problems. The likelihood of this happening in an individual person is like relatively low, although it does happen. But this is more about if you think of us as an entire population and how we're shifting toward antibiotic resistant bacteria. So here are some real life examples. The prevalence of resistant bacterial strains is increasing rapidly in human populations due to a couple factors. The first would be that our antibiotics are often overprescribed, particularly broad spectrum antibiotics, or they're misused. One example of this is a lot of people, let's say that you have a cold, and most colds, actually I think all colds, are caused by viruses. Viruses cannot be treated with antibiotics. They don't work because viruses are not bacteria. But let's say you go to the doctor and you are just adamant that you want penicillin. A lot of times doctors don't have the time to explain the difference between a bacteria and a virus, and it's not really good to do this, but they might just prescribe the antibiotic just to kind of like get you out of the office, right? Okay, whatever, here's your penicillin. But when we're doing that, what we're doing is we're allowing antibiotic resistant bacteria to grow, and to develop and to spread to other humans. So especially when they're overprescribed or when they're misused, that can lead to antibiotic resistance. Many antibiotics are also freely available without a prescription, so meaning people just take them because they have a fever, because they don't feel good, and when that's a virus, then you're killing good bacteria and letting stronger drug-resistant bacteria grow. And certain antibiotics are also given to livestock all the time, meaning that you have antibiotic-resistant salmonella and other bacteria growing in livestock that can then pass to humans through what we eat. And we also find multi-drug resistant bacteria really common in hospitals because most patients in hospitals are probably going to be on some kind of antibiotic. Some examples of drug resistant strains would be MDR tuberculosis. MDR stands for multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. This is a huge problem, especially in developing countries where TB rates are high. Multi-drug resistant TB is a really vicious disease and very difficult to treat because it's resistant to the majority of tuberculosis drugs. This is the patient of a lung with MDR TB. And then MRSA is a common disease that's caused by a multi-drug resistant bacteria. So hopefully you have learned what bacteria is, how bacteria infections work, and also how antibiotics work. So your activity, actually this is your only activity for today, so it shouldn't take too long. I want you to watch the video on antibiotic resistance, which I'm going to also link on Google Classroom. And then I want you to make a comment, or you can respond to someone else's comment on this lesson in classwork. So basically, the exact post that you use to find this video, just go onto that post and comment there, answering this question or extending on someone else's answer. Let's say your friend is sick with a common cold, which is caused by types of coronaviruses, which is pretty interesting, and they have some old antibiotics laying around and decide to take them. What would you say to them? So all I need from you is to watch this video, and make a comment answering this question. All right. That's it for today. Check in for the second lesson for this week, which is going to be on viruses. And please stop by office hours and say hello. Miss y'all.